The elevator doors opened to reveal my husband Marcus pressed against his secretary in what was supposed to be his private office. But what they didn't know was that I held the real power in my hands. Documents that would change everything they thought they knew about Hartwell Industries forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse as I carefully arranged Marcus's breakfast on the marble countertop. Everything had to be perfect. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast cut diagonally, fresh orange juice in his favorite crystal glass. After 8 years of marriage, I knew his routine better than he did. "Morning, sweetheart," Marcus mumbled, barely glancing up from his phone as he grabbed his coffee. His dark hair was already perfectly styled, his expensive suit pressed to perfection. To anyone watching, we looked like the ideal power couple. "Don't forget the Henderson meeting at 3, I reminded him, straightening his tie. "And your mother called about dinner Sunday." He nodded absently, still scrolling through emails. "Reschedule the Henderson thing. Something important came up at the office." Something important. Lately, everything at Hartwell Industries seemed more important than our marriage. I watched him gather his briefcase and keys, the same ritual we'd performed countless mornings. But today felt different somehow. "Marcus?" I called as he headed toward the door. He paused, hand on the doorknob. "What is it, Rebecca?" "I love you." The words hung in the air for a moment. He turned back with that charming smile that had won me over in college. The same one that graced the cover of Business Weekly last month. "Love you too, babe. See you tonight." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone in our pristine home. I stood there for a moment, surrounded by designer furniture and art worth more than most people's houses, yet feeling completely empty. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Sarah. "Coffee later. You sounded stressed yesterday," I typed. Back quickly. "Can't today. Taking lunch to Marcus at the office." It was a lie, but I couldn't explain the growing unease that had been eating at me for weeks. Marcus coming home later and later, mysterious phone calls that ended when I entered the room, the way he'd started working weekends again after years of keeping them free for us. I walked to my home office, a small room tucked away from the main living areas that Marcus rarely entered. The walls were lined with my old journalism awards and photos from my reporting days before I'd given it all up to support his career. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd kept working at the Chicago Tribune instead of becoming the perfect corporate wife. My laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from my private investigator contact, someone I'd worked with during my journalism career. I'd reached out to him last week in a moment of paranoia, asking him to do a discreet background check on some new employees at Hartwell Industries. Nothing serious, just due diligence, I'd told myself. The email was brief. "Rebecca, found some interesting information. Can we meet? This isn't something to discuss over email. Tony." My hands trembled slightly as I closed the laptop. Whatever. Tony had found it was serious enough that he wouldn't put it in writing. I'd been married to Marcus long enough to know that in the corporate world, that usually meant one thing: scandal. I spent the morning trying to distract myself with household tasks, but every small noise made me jump. Finally, at noon, I decided to surprise Marcus with lunch. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe a spontaneous visit would remind us both of why we fell in love. I drove to Hartwell Industries, the 50-story glass tower that Marcus had, built from his father's modest construction company. The lobby was buzzing with activity, employees in sharp suits moving with purpose, their conversations a blur of stock prices and quarterly projections. "Mrs. Hartwell!" The security guard, James, smiled warmly. "Mr. Hartwell isn't expecting you, is he?" "It's a surprise," I said, holding up the bag from Marcus's favorite restaurant. "Is he in his office?" "Last I saw, yes, ma'am. You know the way, the chow." Elevator ride to the 48th floor felt longer than usual. I'd visited Marcus's office hundreds of times over the years, but today my reflection in the polished steel doors looked like a stranger. When did I start looking so tired? When did those worry lines appear around my eyes? The executive floor was quieter than the lobby, with thick carpeting that muffled footsteps and oil paintings that cost more than most people's cars. Marcus's assistant Victoria was away from her desk, probably at lunch. I approached the heavy oak doors to Marcus's corner office, my hand hovering over the handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see two figures inside. Marcus was probably in a meeting. I should come back later, but something made me pause. The figures seemed too close together, their body language too intimate for a business discussion. My heart started racing as I slowly turned the handle, pushing the door open just a crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. Marcus was leaning against his desk, his shirt partially unbuttoned, while Victoria, his 26-year-old assistant, with the perfect blonde hair and legs that went on for miles, was pressed against him, her manicured hands running through his hair. "When are you going to tell her?" Victoria was saying, her voice breathless. "I'm tired of sneaking around, Marcus. I want what's mine." "Soon, baby," Marcus replied, his hands on her waist. "Once the Patterson acquisition goes through, I'll have enough assets secured. Rebecca won't be able to touch the company in the divorce." "You promise? Because I'm not getting any younger, and I want the life you promised me. The penthouse, the cars, the status, all of it." Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and unfamiliar. "Trust me. By the time Rebecca realizes what's happening, everything will be in offshore accounts she doesn't even know exist. She'll get whatever scraps I decide to give her." The lunch bag slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Both of them spun around, and for a moment, time seemed frozen. Marcus's face went pale, then flushed red with anger rather than shame. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" I stood there, unable to speak, as 8 years of marriage crumbled around me. Victoria had the decency to look embarrassed, quickly smoothing down her skirt and stepping away from Marcus. "I brought you lunch," I finally managed, my voice sounding strange and distant. Marcus straightened his shirt, his expression hardening. "We need to talk. Victoria, give us a minute." "Of course, Mr. Hartwell," Victoria said formally, but I caught the triumphant glint in her eyes as she walked past me. The office door closed with a soft click, leaving Marcus and me alone with the weight of his betrayal hanging between us. "How long?" I asked. He had the audacity to look annoyed. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Marcus walked around his desk, putting the massive piece of furniture between us like a barrier. "Look, Rebecca, you're a smart woman. You had to know this was coming." "No, actually I didn't. I thought my husband loved me." "I do love you," he said, but the words sounded hollow. "But love isn't enough anymore. You've become comfortable, predictable. Victoria brings something to my life that you can't." Each word was like a physical blow. "What exactly can't I bring? I gave up my career for you. I've supported every decision you've made, hosted every corporate dinner, smiled at every client. What more could you want?" "I want passion, Rebecca." "Fire. When was the last time you surprised me? When was the last time you did something that wasn't planned and scheduled and perfectly appropriate?" I stared at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "So this is my fault?" "I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I'm saying we've grown apart, and I found someone who understands what I need now." "And what about our vows? For better or worse, remember?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Don't throw our wedding vows at me, Rebecca. You stopped being the woman I married years ago. You became a corporate wife, a beautiful accessory." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become exactly what he'd wanted me to be, and now he was punishing me for it. So what happens now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Now we handle this like adults. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. You'll get the house in Connecticut, a reasonable settlement, enough to live comfortably. But the company stays with me. The company your father left to both of us? Marcus's eyes flashed dangerously. My father left the company to me, Rebecca. You're just a shareholder. I almost laughed at his confidence. Almost. But something in his tone, the way he was so certain about the company's ownership, made me pause. There was something he didn't know, something that could change everything. I'll be staying at Sarah's tonight, I said instead. Have your lawyer call mine. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Rebecca, wait. For a moment, his voice softened. This doesn't have to be ugly. We can be civilized about this. I turned back to look at him one last time. You're right, Marcus. It doesn't have to be ugly. But it's going to be. As I walked out of his office, past Victoria's smug smile, and into the elevator that would take me away from the life I'd known, I thought about the documents hidden in my safe at home. Documents that Marcus had never bothered to read carefully, assuming his name on the corporate paperwork meant what he thought it meant. He was about to learn that assumption could be a very dangerous thing. Sarah's apartment smelled like lavender and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the penthouse I'd called home for the past 5 years. I sat curled up on her oversized couch, still wearing the designer dress I'd put on that morning when my biggest worry was what to make for dinner. I can't believe that bastard, Sarah muttered for the 10th time, pacing around her living room, with a wineglass in hand. 8 years, Rebecca. 8 years of your life, and he throws it away for some blonde bimbo half his age. I stared at the divorce papers that had been delivered by courier just 2 hours after I'd arrived at Sarah's. Marcus certainly didn't waste time. The settlement offer was exactly what he'd promised. The Connecticut house, a monthly allowance. That would keep me comfortable but not wealthy, and absolutely no claim to Hartwell Industries. There's something else, I said quietly. Something I haven't told you. Sarah stopped pacing and turned to face me. We'd been best friends since college, and she could read my expressions better than anyone. What kind of something? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Tony's email. I hired a private investigator last week. Just a feeling I had, you know. Something was off. And? He found something. Something he won't put in writing. Sarah set down her wine glass and grabbed her keys. Then let's go find out what it is. Tony Reeves operated out of a small office above a Chinese restaurant in downtown Chicago. The narrow staircase creaked under our feet as we climbed to the Kai's second floor, the smell of garlic and ginger following us up. Tony's office was exactly what you'd expect from a private investigator. Cluttered desk, filing cabinets that had seen better days, and a coffee pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Rebecca! Tony stood up when we entered, his weathered face creased with concern. I'm sorry about what you're going through. Just tell me what you found, Tony. He gestured for us to sit in the 2 mismatched chairs across from his desk. Tony had been one of my best sources when I was working crime beats for the Tribune. He was thorough, discreet, and had a network of contacts that stretched across 3 states. I started with routine background checks on the new hires at Hartwell. Industries, like you asked, he began, pulling out a thick manila folder. But something caught my attention. Victoria Matthews, your husband's assistant. Sarah leaned forward. What about her? She's not who she says she is. Tony opened the folder and spread out several documents. Her real name is Victoria Kozlov. She worked for Brennan Construction until 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. Brennan Construction was Hartwell Industries' biggest competitor in the commercial development sector. They'd been trying to buy out smaller companies in the Chicago area, the same strategy Marcus had been pursuing. That's industrial espionage. I breathed. It gets worse. Tony pulled out another set of documents. I did some digging into her employment history. Before Brennan, she worked for 3 other companies, all of them competitors of businesses that were later acquired by larger corporations. She's a professional, Sarah said. A corporate spy. Tony nodded grimly. And she's very good at what she does. Each time, she gets hired as an assistant to a key executive, gains access to confidential information, and then mysterious things start happening. Stock prices fluctuate, insider trading investigations, hostile takeovers. I felt sick. How long has she been at Hartwell? 8 months. Right around the time your husband started pursuing the Patterson acquisition. The Patterson acquisition. The deal Marcus had mentioned in his office. The one he was using to secure assets before divorcing me. It was a massive commercial reel. A state portfolio worth nearly $200 million. There's more, Tony continued. I tracked some of her communications. She's been in regular contact with someone at Blackstone Financial Group. Sarah frowned. Who's Blackstone Financial? Private equity firm, I answered automatically. They specialize in hostile takeovers and asset stripping. My journalism background was finally paying off. If Victoria is feeding them information about Hartwell's operations, they could be planning to destroy the company from the inside, Tony finished. Drive down the stock price, create instability, then swoop in with a buyout offer that looks generous but is actually pennies on the dollar. I stared at the documents spread across Tony's desk, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Victoria wasn't just having an affair with my husband. She was systematically destroying his company while making him think it was his idea. Does Marcus know? I asked. Tony shook his head. From what I can tell, he thinks he's the one calling the shots. Victoria's been very careful to make him feel like he's in control while she manipulates every decision. So what do we do? Sarah asked. I stood up, my mind racing. I need to see my father-in-law's will. Tony raised an eyebrow. The will? Why? Because Marcus is so confident about owning the company outright. But I remember something from when his father died 3 years ago. Something about the inheritance terms that didn't quite make sense at the time. We drove back to Sarah's apartment in silence, my mind churning through possibilities. Once there, I called my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, who had handled the estate planning when Marcus's father passed away. Jennifer, it's Rebecca Hartwell. I need to see you tonight. Rebecca? Is everything okay? It's past 9. My husband is divorcing me, and I need to review some documents. Specifically, anything related to ownership of Hartwell Industries. There was a pause. I'll meet you at my office in an hour. Jennifer's law office occupied 3 floors of a downtown skyscraper, all glass and chrome that screamed expensive legal services. Even at 10 p.m., the building was still humming with activity. Associates working late on cases, support staff processing documents, the constant motion of big city legal work. Jennifer met us in the lobby, her usually perfect hair pulled back, in a messy bun, and her designer suit wrinkled from a long day. She'd been Marcus's father's lawyer for 20 years and had handled our personal legal matters since we got married. Tell me what's going on, she said, as we rode the elevator to her floor. I gave her the abbreviated version, the affair, the divorce papers, Marcus's confidence about keeping the company. Jennifer's expression grew more concerned with each detail. Rebecca, there's something you need to know about your father-in-law's will, she said, as we settled into her office. Something I've been waiting for the right time to discuss with you. My heart started pounding. What kind of something? Jennifer pulled out a thick file from her cabinet, the kind of file that held life-changing documents. When Charles Hartwell died, he left very specific instructions about the company ownership. Instructions that Marcus either didn't read carefully or chose to ignore. She opened the file and pulled out several pages of legal documents, all stamped and notarized. According to the will, Marcus inherited 51% of Hartwell Industries, giving him controlling interest and the position of CEO. Right, I said. That's what I thought. But there's a clause, Jennifer continued. A very specific clause that activates under certain circumstances. If Marcus dies, becomes incapacitated, or divorces his spouse within 10 years of his father's death, his controlling interest reverts to a trust. Sarah leaned forward. What kind of trust? A trust managed by his surviving spouse. That would be you, Rebecca, until any children reach the age of 25. Since you and Marcus don't have children, the trust would be managed by you indefinitely. I stared at the documents, the words swimming before my eyes. You're saying that if Marcus divorces me, I become the controlling shareholder of Hartwell Industries? That's exactly what I'm saying. Charles Hartwell was very concerned about the family legacy. He'd seen too many family businesses destroyed by divorce and wanted to ensure the company stayed in the family. He believed that the spouse who sacrificed their career to support the business deserved protection. Does Marcus know this? Jennifer shook her head. I tried to explain the full terms of the will to him after his father's death, but he was grieving and overwhelmed. He signed all the documents and told me he'd review them later. I don't think he ever did. So when he files for divorce, the controlling interest automatically transfers to you. He'll go from owning 51% to owning 39%. You'll own 51%, and the remaining 10% is held in a charitable trust that votes with the majority shareholder. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Marcus was about to hand me control of his company while simultaneously destroying it with his affair with a corporate spy. There's more, Jennifer continued. The will also includes provisions about corporate malfeasance. If the company suffers significant losses due to the CEO's personal conduct or poor judgment, the trust can vote to remove him from his position. And Victoria's espionage would definitely qualify as poor judgment, Sarah said. Absolutely. Especially if we can prove he was aware of it or should have been aware of it. I thought about all the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the weekend work sessions that had started right around the time Victoria was hired. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been unknowingly collaborating with someone who was systematically destroying everything his father had built. What do I need to do? I asked. Jennifer pulled out another set of documents. First, we need to file a response to the divorce petition. Instead of accepting his settlement offer, we're going to demand a full accounting of all company assets and operations over the past 8 months. Will that give us access to Victoria's communications? As a shareholder, you have the right to review any documents that might affect the company's value or operations. If there's evidence of corporate espionage, we'll find it. And then we expose everything. The affair, the espionage, the financial damage to the company. We make it clear that Marcus's judgment has been compromised and that he's unfit to continue as CEO. Sarah grinned. I love it. He thinks he's getting rid of you to protect his company, but he's actually handing you the company to protect it from him. I looked at the documents in my hands, legal papers that would change everything. Tomorrow, Marcus would wake up thinking he was one step closer to his new life with Victoria. He had no idea that he was about to lose everything he'd worked for. There's one more thing, I said. I want to hire security. If Victoria realizes we're onto her, she might try to destroy evidence or accelerate whatever timeline she's working on. Jennifer nodded. I know someone. Discreet, professional, and very good at corporate security. As we left Jennifer's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope for revenge, but hope for justice. Marcus and Victoria thought they were so clever, manipulating situations and people to get what they wanted. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I'd spent 8 years being the perfect corporate wife, smiling and supporting and staying in the background. But I'd also spent 5 years before that as an investigative journalist, digging into corporate corruption and exposing people who thought they were untouchable. Marcus was about to rediscover exactly who he'd married. And Victoria was about to learn that some targets fight back. The next morning, I woke up in Sarah's guest room with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had work to do, and for the first time in a long time, it was work that mattered to me personally. Was going to save Hartwell Industries from the people who were trying to destroy it, even if one of those people was my husband. The corporate security team Jennifer recommended worked fast. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in a surveillance van parked 3 blocks from Hartwell Industries, watching live feeds from cameras that had been discreetly installed throughout the building's common areas during the night shift. "Your husband's secretary is very careful," said Detective Mike Rodriguez, the head of the security team. He was a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime, with graying temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "She varies her routes through the building, never uses the same computer twice for sensitive communications, and always carries a signal-blocking pouch for her personal phone." "Professional training," I murmured, watching Victoria on the monitor as she walked through the lobby with confident strides. She wore a different outfit every day. Today it was a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. All funded by whatever organization was paying her to destroy my husband's company. "The interesting thing is what she's not doing," Rodriguez continued. "She's not accessing the financial systems directly. Instead, she's manipulating your husband into making specific decisions by feeding him selective information." On another monitor, I watched Marcus arrive at the office, his usual swagger intact. He had no idea that his wife was watching his every move, documenting his betrayal while preparing to save him from his own stupidity. "Show me the pattern," I said. Rodriguez pulled up a digital timeline on his tablet. 3 weeks ago, she convinced him to delay the Patterson acquisition review by claiming their legal team needed more time. But the real reason was to give Blackstone financial additional time to position themselves for a counteroffer. And Marcus bought it? Completely. "Look at this." He showed me an email chain between Marcus and the Patterson Group. He's been stalling them with excuses about due diligence while Blackstone has been quietly purchasing Patterson's debt obligations. I felt sick. They're going to own Patterson before Marcus even realizes he's lost the deal. Gets worse. 2 weeks ago, Victoria suggested he restructure the company's credit lines to optimize cash flow. The banks she recommended all have connections to Blackstone's investment portfolio. Every decision Marcus thought he was making independently had been carefully orchestrated to weaken Hartwell Industries from within. Victoria was playing a long game, and my husband was too blinded by infatuation to see it. "We need more than circumstantial evidence," I said. "Can you get me into her communications?" Rodriguez exchanged a look with his partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Karen Chen. "That's where things get complicated. Victoria's not using company systems for her real communications. She's got a separate network." "What kind of network?" Chen pulled out her laptop and showed me a series of technical diagrams. Encrypted messaging apps, VPN connections, burner phones that get replaced weekly. She's running a full counterintelligence operation. "But you found a way in?" "We found something better," Rodriguez said with a grim smile. "We found her handler." The surveillance photos he showed me made my blood run cold. A man in an expensive suit meets Victoria at various coffee shops and restaurants around the city. Someone who looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen him before. "His name is David Brennan," Chen explained. "Son of the CEO of Brennan Construction, the same company Victoria worked for before coming to Hartwell." The pieces clicked into place. This isn't just corporate espionage. It's a coordinated attack by our biggest competitor. Exactly. And they're not just trying to steal business. They're trying to acquire Hartwell Industries at a fraction of its actual value by destroying it from the inside first. I stared at the photos, my anger building with each image. Victoria and David Brennan, planning my husband's downfall over lattes and croissants. Marcus thought he was having a passionate affair, but he was actually being played by professionals who saw him as nothing more than a mark. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "Based on the timeline we've reconstructed, probably 2 weeks before they make their move," Rodriguez said. "The Patterson deal falls through, the restructured credit lines create a cash flow crisis, and suddenly, Brennan Construction offers to buy Hartwell's assets to help with the transition." "For pennies on the dollar," I finished. "While your husband thinks he's the one orchestrating everything to secure his personal assets for the divorce." The irony was almost funny. Marcus was working so hard to screw me over in the divorce that he was letting someone else screw him over in business. If I weren't so angry, I might have laughed. "What's our next move?" I asked. Chen closed her laptop and looked at me seriously. "That depends on what you want to accomplish. Do you want to save the company, or do you want to save your marriage?" "I want to save the company," I said without hesitation. "The marriage is over, but Hartwell Industries employs 300 people, and I won't let Marcus's stupidity put them out of work." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Then we need to move fast. First, we document everything. Every meeting, every decision, every communication between Victoria and her handlers. Build an airtight case for corporate sabotage. And then? Then we spring the trap. But we do it carefully, because once Victoria realizes she's been exposed, she'll activate whatever contingency plans she has in place." I thought about the inheritance clause in Charles Hartwell's will, the legal mechanism that would transfer control of the company to me the moment the divorce was finalized. Marcus was inadvertently handing me the power to stop Victoria's plans, but only if we timed everything perfectly. "I need to get back into the office," I said. "As his wife, I still have access to the executive floor. If I can get close enough to Marcus's office—" "Too risky," Chen interrupted. "Victoria knows you caught them together. She'll be watching for any sign that you're investigating." "Then what do you suggest?" Rodriguez smiled. "We use the one advantage she doesn't know we have. She thinks you're just a heartbroken wife going through a messy divorce. She has no idea you're fighting back." Over the next hour, they outlined a plan that was both elegant and dangerous. I would play the part of the devastated wife, letting Marcus and Victoria think they had won while we gathered evidence of their betrayal. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's team would track Victoria's communications and document her meetings with David Brennan. "The key is making them overconfident," Chen explained. "Let them think their plan is working perfectly. People make mistakes when they think they're winning. And what about the divorce proceedings?" "You file the response we discussed with Jennifer, demanding full disclosure of company assets. That gives you legal standing to investigate the business operations while appearing to be motivated by the divorce settlement." I nodded, understanding the strategy. Marcus would think I was trying to grab as much money as possible in the divorce, never suspecting that I was actually trying to save his company from destruction. "There's one more thing," Rodriguez added. "We've identified several other companies that have been targeted by similar operations. Brennan Construction has been running this same playbook for 3 years, destroying family businesses to acquire their assets." "How many?" 7 companies so far. All of them ended up selling to Brennan for far less than market value after experiencing mysterious financial difficulties. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Victoria wasn't just targeting my husband. She was part of a systematic operation to destroy family businesses across the region. The thought of all those families losing their livelihoods made my determination even stronger. "Then we stop them here," I said firmly. "Whatever it takes." As I left the surveillance van and drove back to Sarah's apartment, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that used to fuel my journalism work. There was nothing quite like the feeling of uncovering corruption and knowing you had the power to expose it. Marcus thought he was so clever, planning his new life with Victoria while protecting his business assets. Victoria thought she was manipulating him perfectly while setting up Hartwell Industries for destruction. Neither of them realized they were being watched, documented, and outmaneuvered by the woman they had both underestimated. In 2 weeks, when the divorce was finalized and I became the controlling shareholder of Hartwell Industries, I would have the power to undo all the damage they had caused. But first, I needed to let them dig their hole a little deeper. The hardest part would be pretending to be the broken, defeated wife while I was actually preparing to destroy their entire operation. But after 8 years of being the perfect corporate wife, I had plenty of practice at playing a role. This time, though, the role would serve my purposes instead of someone else's. The courthouse steps were slippery with morning frost as I walked toward the family law division, wearing my most conservative navy suit and carrying a briefcase that made me look exactly what Marcus expected. A desperate wife trying to salvage something from her failed marriage. What he didn't know was that the briefcase contained recording devices and documents that would eventually destroy him. Jennifer met me in the hallway outside the mediation room, her expression perfectly calibrated to suggest resigned defeat. We'd rehearsed this performance for 2 days, making sure every gesture and word would reinforce Marcus's belief that he was winning. "Rebecca, I have to be honest with you," Jennifer said loudly enough for Marcus's lawyer to overhear as he approached. "Your husband's financial disclosures show the company is in a much stronger position than we anticipated. The settlement offer might be the best we can do." Marcus's lawyer, a shark named Hamilton Cross who charged $800 an hour, smiled with satisfaction. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you'll be reasonable today. My client is prepared to be generous, but his patience isn't unlimited." I let my shoulders slump slightly, playing the part of a woman who was finally accepting defeat. "I just want what's fair, Mr. Cross. I gave up everything for this marriage, and Mr. Hartwell appreciates that sacrifice," Cross replied smoothly, "which is why he's offering such a substantial settlement despite the circumstances of the separation." The mediation room was sterile and cold, with a conference table that could have hosted a corporate board meeting. Marcus sat on one side with Cross and 2 associates, while Jennifer and I took the opposite side. The mediator, a gray-haired woman named Judge Patricia Wells, reviewed the files with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen hundreds of marriages dissolve. "Mr. Hartwell," Judge Wells began, "your wife is requesting full financial disclosure of all business assets, including detailed records of Hartwell Industries' operations over the past year. Are you prepared to provide that information?" Marcus leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. "Of course, Your Honor. I have nothing to hide. My company's success speaks for itself." Cross slid a thick folder across the table. "Complete financial statements, asset valuations, and operational summaries. As you can see, Hartwell Industries is performing exceptionally well under my client's leadership." I made a show of reviewing the documents while secretly activating the recording device hidden in my pen. Every word spoken in this room would be documented, creating a legal record of Marcus's claims about the company's performance. "These numbers look impressive," I said carefully. "But I'm concerned about some of the recent strategic decisions. The Patterson acquisition, for instance. When will that be finalized?" Marcus's expression tightened slightly. "The Patterson deal is proceeding according to schedule. My team is handling the final due diligence. Your team being Victoria Matthews, correct? Your assistant who's been managing the negotiations?" Cross shot Marcus a warning look, but the damage was done. Marcus had just confirmed under oath that Victoria was handling sensitive business negotiations, establishing her access to confidential information. "Ms. Matthews is highly qualified," Marcus said stiffly. "She has extensive experience in commercial real estate." "I'm sure she does," I replied, letting just a hint of bitterness creep into my voice. "Perfect. Let him think my questions were motivated by jealousy rather than investigation." Judge Wells intervened before the tension could escalate. "Let's focus on the settlement terms. Mrs. Hartwell, are you satisfied with the financial disclosures?" "I'd like to request additional documentation," Jennifer said, pulling out a prepared list. "Specifically, communications regarding the Patterson acquisition, records of any changes to the company's credit arrangements, and details about new consulting contracts or partnerships. Cross frowned. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Mrs. Hartwell is not entitled to proprietary business information beyond what affects the marital assets. Actually, Jennifer replied smoothly, as a shareholder in Hartwell Industries, my client has legitimate concerns about business decisions that could affect the company's value. These documents are necessary to ensure an accurate valuation of the marital assets. Marcus looked confused. Shareholder? Rebecca isn't a shareholder. The moment of silence that followed was delicious. I watched Marcus's confidence waver as he realized there might be something about his own company that he didn't understand. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Wells said carefully, are you claiming your wife has no ownership interest in Hartwell Industries? That's correct. The company was inherited from my father. Rebecca has no legal claim to it. Jennifer and I exchanged a glance that Marcus completely missed. He was digging his own grave with every word, creating a legal record of his misunderstanding about the company ownership structure. Very well, Judge Wells said. Mr. Cross, please provide the additional documentation requested. We'll reconvene in 1 week to review the materials and finalize the settlement. As we gathered our papers, Marcus leaned across the table toward me. Rebecca, this doesn't have to be difficult. Accept the settlement, and we can both move on with our lives. I looked into his eyes, seeing the man I'd once loved buried beneath layers of arrogance and betrayal. You're right, Marcus. I'm ready to move on. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what I'm walking away from. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer and I maintained our dejected act until we were safely in her car with the windows up and the radio playing to mask our conversation. Perfect performance, Jennifer said, starting the engine. Marcus just confirmed multiple key facts under oath, and we have a court order for the documents Rodriguez's team needs to build their case. Did you see his face when you mentioned the shareholder status? He has no idea what's coming. The question is whether Victoria does. We drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of downtown, the kind of place where two women having coffee wouldn't attract attention. Rodriguez was already waiting in a corner booth, his laptop open and his expression grim. We intercepted some interesting communications this morning, he said without preamble. Victoria's handlers are getting nervous about the divorce proceedings. He turned his laptop screen toward us, showing a series of encrypted messages that his team had decoded. The contents made my blood run cold. They're accelerating the timeline, I said, reading the coded references to asset liquidation and final phase implementation. Victoria's been ordered to trigger the cash flow crisis within the next 72 hours, Rodriguez confirmed. They want Hartwell Industries vulnerable before the divorce is finalized. Jennifer frowned. Why the rush? Because someone tipped them off that Rebecca might be more dangerous than they initially thought, Rodriguez replied. They don't know exactly what she's planning, but they're not taking any chances. I felt a chill of fear mixed with excitement. Victoria and her handlers were skilled professionals, but they were also human. The fact that they were rushing their timeline meant they were making mistakes, taking risks they might not have taken with more time to plan. What's the trigger going to be? I asked. Rodriguez pulled up another document, this one a forged invoice, from one of Hartwell's major suppliers. They're going to claim a payment processing error that requires immediate cash to resolve. Victoria will convince Marcus to authorize an emergency transfer that will drain the company's operating accounts. And then Brennan Construction swoops in with a rescue offer to acquire Hartwell's assets and assume its debts. Marcus will think he's saving the company, but he'll actually be handing it over for a fraction of its value. The elegance of the plan was infuriating. Marcus would believe he was making a heroic sacrifice to save his employees' jobs, never realizing he was being manipulated by the woman he thought loved him. Can we stop the transfer? Jennifer asked. Not without tipping our hand, Rodriguez replied. But we can make sure the money ends up somewhere safe, and we can document the entire fraud for the authorities." I stared out the cafe window, watching. Ordinary people go about their ordinary lives while my world balanced on the edge of a knife. In 3 days, either I would save Hartwell Industries and expose the conspiracy that had destroyed 7 other family businesses, or I would lose everything and watch Marcus hand over his father's legacy to the people who had manipulated him into destroying it. "There's one more thing," Rodriguez added quietly. "We found evidence that Victoria's been recording her intimate encounters with Marcus." The betrayal within betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Blackmail material? Insurance policy. If Marcus ever figured out what was really happening, they could destroy his reputation and credibility with a sex scandal. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of Marcus's stupidity and Victoria's calculated cruelty. My husband hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically compromised by professionals who had documented his every weakness. When I opened my eyes, Rodriguez and Jennifer were watching me with concern. "Are you okay?" Jennifer asked. Straightened my shoulders and felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. "I'm better than okay. I'm ready to end this." In 72 hours, Victoria would make her move. But she had no idea that I would be ready for her. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 a.m. sharp, exactly 48 hours after our courthouse session. I sat in the parking garage across from Hartwell Industries, watching through binoculars as the board members arrived one by one. Marcus had no idea that half of them had already been contacted by Jennifer, who had spent the previous day making very careful phone calls about concerns regarding recent company decisions. "Target acquired." Rodriguez's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Victoria just entered the building with David Brennan. They're not even trying to hide anymore." I adjusted my position in the surveillance van, watching the live feed from the cameras Rodriguez's team had installed. Victoria walked through the lobby like she owned the place, her red power suit and confident stride broadcasting dominance to everyone around her. Beside her, David Brennan carried a leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained the final documents for their takeover scheme. "Marcus is in his office," Chen reported from her position on the 32nd floor. "He's reviewing the emergency financial reports Victoria prepared for the board meeting. Reports that were completely fabricated, designed to make Hartwell Industries look like it was on the verge of bankruptcy. Marcus would present these numbers to the board, recommend the emergency cash transfer to save the company, and unknowingly trigger the final phase of his own destruction." "Jennifer's in position?" I asked. "Conference room B with the real financial documents and the evidence packages," Rodriguez confirmed. "She's ready to move as soon as you give the signal." I checked my watch. In 30 minutes, Marcus would walk into that boardroom believing he was about to save his company. Instead, he was about to lose everything: his business, his reputation, and his freedom. Part of me should have felt sorry for him, but the memory of his arrogant confidence in the courthouse had burned away any remaining sympathy. "Rebecca," Chen's voice was urgent. "We have a problem. Victoria just sent a text message to an unknown number. The content was just one word: abort." My blood ran cold. They know something's wrong. "She's moving toward the elevator. Brennan's with her." I grabbed the radio. "Don't let them leave the building, whatever it takes." "Already on it," Rodriguez replied. "Building security just received an anonymous tip about corporate espionage. All exits are being monitored." On the surveillance monitor, I watched Victoria's confident stride falter as she reached the lobby and saw 2 security guards stationed by the main entrance. Her professional training kicked in immediately. She veered toward the side exit, pulling out her phone to make a call. "Chen, where are you?" "Following them. Victoria's trying to reach the parking garage, but we've got that covered too." I started, the engine of my rental car, adrenaline pumping through my veins. This wasn't how we'd planned it, but sometimes the best-laid plans had to adapt to reality. Victoria was smart enough to sense danger, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd Waited too long to run. Rodriguez, what's Marcus doing? Still in his office, completely oblivious. He's actually practicing his presentation for the board meeting. The irony was perfect. Marcus was rehearsing the speech that would supposedly save his company while his mistress was desperately trying to escape with evidence of their crimes. In 10 minutes, he would walk into that boardroom and discover that his perfect plan had been a lie from the beginning. I drove toward the building's main entrance, my hand steady on the wheel despite the chaos in my earpiece. Through the glass lobby doors, I could see Victoria and Brennan arguing near the elevator bank. Victoria was gesturing angrily while Brennan checked his watch repeatedly. "They're trapped," Chen reported. "Victoria's trying to delete files from her phone, but our signal jammer is blocking her data connection. And Brennan? Looks like he's about to have a panic attack. This wasn't supposed to go wrong." I parked across the street and walked toward the building, timing my arrival perfectly. As I entered the lobby, Victoria spotted me immediately. Her face went pale, then flushed with rage as she realized exactly who had outmaneuvered her. "Rebecca," she said, her voice ice-cold but controlled. "What a surprise to see you here." "Not really," I replied, walking closer. "This is still my husband's company, for now." Brennan looked confused, glancing between Victoria and me like he couldn't understand what was happening. He was used to dealing with corporate victims who didn't fight back, not women who had spent months planning their revenge. "David Brennan, I presume," I said, extending my hand with mock politeness. "I've heard so much about you from the other families you've destroyed." His face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The Chen family from Portland, the Martinez Construction Company in Seattle, the Thompson Development Group in Minneapolis." I watched his expression crumble with each name. 7 family businesses ruined by the same playbook you're trying to use on my husband. Victoria stepped between us, her professional mask slipping for the first time since I'd known her. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I know. Exactly what I'm interfering with. Industrial espionage, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate theft. Should I go on?" "You can't prove anything." I smiled and pulled out my phone, opening the voice recording app that had been running since I entered the building. "Actually, I can prove everything, including the conversation you're having right now." The elevator doors opened behind them, and Marcus stepped out, his presentation materials tucked under his arm and a confident smile on his face. The smile died instantly when he saw me standing with Victoria and a man he didn't recognize. "Rebecca? What are you doing here?" "Saving your company," I said simply. "Marcus, meet David Brennan, son of the CEO of Brennan Construction, Victoria's real employer, and the man who's been planning to steal your father's business for the past 8 months." Marcus looked from me to Victoria to Brennan, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "What is she talking about, Victoria?" Victoria's training finally kicked in completely. Her face went blank, her voice perfectly neutral. "She's lying, Marcus. She's desperate and trying to sabotage your business out of spite." "Then explain why?" "Mr. Brennan is here," I said. "Explain why you've been meeting with him twice a week for the past 6 months. Explain why every financial decision you've convinced Marcus to make has weakened Hartwell Industries while strengthening Brennan Construction's position in the market." "That's ridiculous," Victoria said, but I could see cracks forming in her. "Composure. Marcus, don't listen to her. She's been trying to destroy our relationship from the beginning." Marcus stared at Victoria with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but genuine confusion. "Victoria, who is this man?" The moment stretched out like a wire about to snap. Victoria looked at Brennan, who was backing slowly toward the security desk. She looked at Marcus, whose trust was crumbling in real time. And she looked at me, standing there with evidence that could destroy her entire operation. Finally, she made her choice. "Marcus," she said, her voice suddenly desperate, "I love you. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future together. Don't let her poison what we have. It was the wrong move. Marcus had built his entire identity around being a smart businessman, someone who could see through deceptions and make calculated decisions. Victoria's appeal to emotion instead of logic told him everything he needed to know about which one of us was telling the truth. "Security?" he called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Detain these people until the police arrive." Brennan broke and ran for the nearest exit, but the guards Chen had positioned were waiting for him. Victoria stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed operation collapse around her. "The board meeting," Marcus said to me, his voice hollow. "The emergency financial situation, completely fabricated. Your company is fine, Marcus. It was always fine. The only threat to Hartwell Industries was standing right next to you." He looked at Victoria one last time, and I saw the exact moment when 8 months of manipulation became crystal clear to him. "You never loved me." "No," Victoria said quietly. "But you made it very easy." The police arrived exactly on schedule. Rodriguez had timed their call perfectly. As Victoria and Brennan were led away in handcuffs, Marcus stood in the middle of his lobby, looking like a man who had just realized he'd been living in a completely different reality than he thought. "Rebecca," he said, turning to me. "I don't understand. How did you—" "The divorce papers will be finalized tomorrow," I said, cutting him off. "And when they are, the controlling interest in Hartwell Industries transfers to me under your father's will. The first thing I'm going to do is fire you." His face went pale. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious. You almost destroyed everything. Your father built because you couldn't see past your own ego. The company deserves better leadership." I walked toward the elevator that would take me to the boardroom where Jennifer was waiting with the real board members and the real financial documents. Behind me, Marcus called my name, but I didn't turn around. I had a company to save and a future to build. And for the first time in 8 years, I was going to do it on my own terms. The boardroom had never felt so quiet. 8 members of Hartwell Industries' board of directors sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces ranging from shocked to furious as Jennifer finished presenting the evidence of Victoria's corporate espionage operation. Marcus slumped in his chair at the head of the table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in the past hour. "The financial impact could have been catastrophic," said Eleanor Chen, the board's longest-serving member and a close friend of Marcus's late father. "If Mrs. Hartwell hadn't uncovered this conspiracy, we would have lost everything." Board member Thomas Morrison, a silver-haired banker who had helped finance Hartwell's expansion, shook his head in disbelief. 8 months of systematic manipulation. How did none of us see it? "Because Victoria Matthews was very good at her job," I replied from my seat opposite Marcus. This wasn't amateur hour. She and her handlers had refined this operation over 3 years and 7 companies. The evidence spread across the table painted a devastating picture. Forged invoices, manipulated financial reports, documented meetings between Victoria and Brennan operatives, and most damning of all, recordings of Victoria discussing the timeline for Hartwell's destruction with her handlers. "What about the Patterson acquisition?" asked Sarah Rodriguez, the board's youngest member and head of strategic development. Jennifer pulled out another folder. "Completely sabotaged. Patterson Group was ready to sign at our original offer, but Victoria convinced Marcus to delay while Blackstone Financial bought up Patterson's debt. We've lost a $200 million deal." Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we recover it?" "Maybe," I said. "Patterson's CEO called me this morning. He's willing to negotiate directly with new management." The implication hung heavy in the air. New management meant Marcus was out. Eleanor Chen cleared her throat. "Rebecca, we understand that under Charles Hartwell's will, the controlling interest in this company transfers to you upon finalization of your divorce. What are your intentions?" I stood up and walked to the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. 48 floors below, the city buzzed with life, people going to work, building careers, supporting families. 300 Hartwell Industries. Employees were doing the same thing in this building, unaware that their jobs had almost been destroyed by one man's ego and a woman's calculated deception. My first act as controlling shareholder will be to remove Marcus Hartwell as CEO, I said, turning back to face the room. The board will need to select interim leadership while we search for a permanent replacement. Rebecca, please, Marcus said, standing up. I know I made mistakes, but this is my father's company. It's my legacy. Your father's legacy almost died because you couldn't see past your own desires, I replied coldly. You gave sensitive financial information to a corporate spy because you were thinking with your hormones instead of your brain. Thomas Morrison leaned forward. What about criminal charges? The evidence suggests multiple felonies. The FBI is building cases against Victoria Matthews, David Brennan, and several executives at Blackstone Financial, Jennifer answered. The conspiracy involves interstate commerce and securities fraud. They're looking at significant prison time. And Marcus? Eleanor asked. I looked at my soon-to-be ex-husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He wasn't evil, just weak and vain and easily manipulated. But weakness in a CEO could destroy hundreds of lives. Marcus won't face criminal charges, I said. He was a victim of the conspiracy, even if his own actions made him vulnerable to it. But he can't remain in a position where his judgment affects other people's livelihoods. So what happens to me? Marcus asked. You'll retain your 39% ownership stake, I explained. You'll receive dividends and have a voice in major decisions through the board. But you won't have operational control. The boardroom. Door opened, and Rodriguez entered with a grim expression. Sorry to interrupt, but we have developments. The FBI just arrested 3 more executives at Blackstone Financial, and they found evidence of additional targets. Additional targets? Sarah Rodriguez asked. 12 more family businesses across the Midwest. The conspiracy was much larger than we initially thought. He handed me a tablet with the FBI's preliminary report. The good news is that Hartwell Industries is being praised as the company that broke the case open. Your investigation provided the breakthrough the feds needed. I scrolled through the report, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was being served, sadness for all the families who had already lost their businesses to this scheme. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. Victoria Matthews is trying to cut a deal. She's offering to testify against her handlers in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus looked up hopefully. Does that mean she might not go to prison? She's still looking at 5 to 10 years minimum, Rodriguez replied. Corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud are serious federal crimes. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of consequences. Victoria's bright future with her corporate spy career was over. David Brennan would likely inherit his father's business from a federal prison cell, and Marcus would have to live with the knowledge that his affair had almost destroyed everything his father had built. I have a proposal, I said, addressing the board. I want to create a new position, Director of Corporate Security, someone whose job is to prevent this kind of infiltration from happening again. Excellent idea, Eleanor said. Do you have someone in mind? Detective Rodriguez has agreed to leave the police force and join us full-time. His team proved they can protect us from sophisticated threats. Rodriguez nodded. We've already identified several security vulnerabilities that Victoria exploited. With the board's permission, we'd like to implement comprehensive countermeasures. Over the next hour, we outlined a complete restructuring of Hartwell Industries' security protocols. Background checks for all employees with access to sensitive information. Regular audits of financial systems. Monitoring of communications for suspicious patterns. It would be expensive, but not nearly as expensive as losing the company to corporate spies. What about succession planning? Thomas Morrison asked. If you're going to be CEO, Rebecca, we need to discuss long-term leadership development. I smiled. Actually, I don't want to be CEO. I want to return to my journalism career, but with a focus on investigating corporate crimes. What happened here needs to be exposed so other families can protect themselves. The board members exchanged surprised glances. Eleanor Chen spoke first. If not you, then who? I recommend we promote Janet Stevens from inside the company. She's been our VP of Operations for 5 years. She knows the business inside and out. And most importantly, she's never been compromised by personal relationships that affected her. Judgment. Marcus looked shocked. You're giving up control of the company? I'm ensuring the company has the right leadership. There's a difference. But you could have everything. The power, the money, the status. I gathered my papers and stood up. I already have everything I want, Marcus. I have my self-respect, my integrity, and the knowledge that I saved 300 jobs from your poor judgment. That's worth more than any CEO salary. As I walked toward the door, Marcus called my name one last time. Rebecca, I'm sorry. For everything. I paused at the door and looked back at him. I know you are, Marcus, but sorry doesn't undo 8 months of corporate espionage or repair the trust you broke. Learn from this, but learn it somewhere else. Outside the boardroom, Jennifer was waiting with the final divorce papers. Judge Wells signed the decree this morning. It's official. I took the papers, feeling a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and asset divisions. But also 8 years of subordinating my dreams to someone else's ambitions finally coming to an end. Any regrets? Jennifer asked as we walked toward the elevator. I thought about the question as we descended toward the lobby. Regrets about the marriage ending? No. Regrets about the choices I'd made to save Marcus's company despite his betrayal? Absolutely not. Just one, I said as the elevator doors opened. I regret that it took me so long to remember who I really am. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding my journalism career with the biggest story of my life, the corporate espionage, conspiracy that had destroyed 7 family businesses and almost claimed an 8th. But tonight, for the first time in years, I would go to sleep knowing that I had acted with courage, intelligence, and integrity. Marcus would have to live with his choices. I was finally free to live with mine. 6 months later, I stood in the newsroom of the Chicago Tribune, surrounded by the controlled chaos that I had missed more than I realized. Reporters hunched over computers, chasing deadlines and breaking stories. Phones rang constantly. The energy was electric, purposeful, and completely different from the sterile corporate environment I had left behind. Rebecca, the FBI just released additional documents in the Blackstone case, called out Jake Morrison, my new research partner and one of the Tribune's best investigative journalists. You're going to want to see this. I walked over to his desk, where he had spread out papers that represented months of federal investigation. The scope of the conspiracy had grown beyond anything we'd initially imagined. Blackstone Financial hadn't just targeted family businesses. They had systematically infiltrated dozens of companies across 12 states, stealing trade secrets, manipulating stock prices, and orchestrating hostile takeovers worth over $2 billion. Look at this, Jake said, pointing to an organizational chart. Victoria Matthews wasn't working alone. She was part of a network of corporate spies, all trained by the same private intelligence firm. The chart showed connections between operatives placed in companies across the country. Each spy had a specialty. Some focused on financial manipulation, others on industrial espionage, still others on blackmail and personal compromise. Victoria had been their relationship specialist, trained to seduce and manipulate executives into making self-destructive decisions. How many people like Marcus? I asked, studying the names and companies. 43 confirmed cases so far. CEOs, CFOs, department heads, all of them compromised by operatives who made them believe they We're in love. I felt a familiar chill thinking about all those families destroyed, all those employees who lost their jobs because someone in power couldn't see past their own ego and desire. Marcus had been foolish and weak, but he was far from unique. Though, trial starts next week, Jake continued. Victoria's lawyers are still pushing for a plea deal, but the prosecutors aren't interested. They want to make an example. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of testimony, depositions, and investigations. I had spent countless hours working with FBI agents, helping them understand the intricacies of how Victoria had manipulated Hartwell Industries' operations. My journalism background had been invaluable in piecing together the timeline of deception. Any word from Marcus? Jake asked carefully. He knew the personal history, but we had both worked hard to keep the story focused on the broader conspiracy, rather than my failed marriage. He's been cooperating fully with the investigation, I replied. His testimony about Victoria's manipulation tactics has been crucial for the prosecution. It was true, though it didn't capture the full complexity of my relationship with my ex-husband. Marcus had been devastated by the revelation of how thoroughly he had been played. The man who had once strutted through board meetings with supreme confidence now second-guessed every decision. He had entered therapy, both to deal with the trauma of manipulation and to understand how his own character flaws had made him vulnerable. "Rebecca, phone call," shouted Lisa Chen, the Tribune's city editor. "It's Janet Stevens from Hartwell Industries." I walked to my desk and picked up the phone. "Janet, how are things?" "Busy, but good," came the reply. Janet had proven to be an excellent CEO, bringing steady leadership and careful decision-making to a company that had been nearly destroyed by reckless choices. "I'm calling because we just finalized the Patterson acquisition." "That's fantastic news. 250 million better terms than Marcus's original deal." Turns out Patterson was so impressed by how we handled the crisis that they decided we were exactly the kind of partners they wanted. The irony was perfect. Hartwell Industries was stronger now than it had been before Victoria's sabotage, precisely because they had learned to value security and careful judgment over flashy risk-taking. "How are the employees adjusting?" I asked. "Morale is actually higher than it's been in years. People feel safe knowing we have real security protocols in place. And Rodriguez's corporate security division has become a profit center. Other companies are hiring us to audit their vulnerability to infiltration." Rodriguez had indeed transformed from police detective to corporate security expert, and his success had spawned an entirely new industry. Companies across the country were suddenly interested in protecting themselves from the kind of sophisticated espionage that had nearly destroyed Hartwell Industries. "There's something else," Janet continued. "Marcus has been asking about you." I sighed. This wasn't the first time Janet had brought this up. "What about me? He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet for coffee. Just to talk." "Janet, we've been through this. Marcus and I are finished. There's nothing to talk about. I think he wants to apologize properly. The man I see now is very different from the one who almost destroyed the company. Therapy has humbled him." I looked around the newsroom at the career I had rebuilt and the purpose I had rediscovered. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Janet. Some chapters need to stay closed." After ending the call, I returned to the documents Jake had spread across his desk. Tomorrow's story would expose another layer of the conspiracy, revealing how Blackstone Financial had used a network of shell companies to hide their involvement in the corporate espionage operation. It was the kind of investigative work that reminded me why I had become a journalist in the first place. "You know what I find most interesting about this whole case?" Jake said, looking up from his computer. "What's that?" "The victims who fought back did better than the ones who just accepted what happened to them. Your story, in particular. You didn't just save your company. You turned yourself into the protagonist of your own life." His words struck me more deeply than he probably intended. For 8 years, I had been a supporting character in Marcus's story, playing the role of the perfect corporate wife while my own dreams and ambitions withered away. The betrayal and divorce had been devastating, but they had also forced me to rediscover who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. The real tragedy, I said, thinking out loud, is how many people never get that chance. They stay trapped in supporting roles their entire lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tonight? I have news." I texted back, "Your place. At 7. I'll bring wine." Sarah's apartment had become my refuge during the most difficult months of the divorce and investigation. She had listened to my tears, celebrated my victories, and reminded me that friendship was often more valuable than marriage. "So what's the news?" I asked, as we settled onto her couch with glasses of wine and Chinese takeout. "I got the promotion," she said, grinning. "Senior partner at the firm, effective next month." "Sarah, that's incredible." I hugged her, genuinely thrilled. Sarah had been working toward partner level at her law firm for 6 years, and she deserved every bit of success. "It got me thinking, though," she continued, "about taking risks, going after what you really want. Watching you rebuild your life inspired me to push harder for mine." We talked late into the evening about careers and dreams, and the strange ways that crisis could lead to growth. Sarah had watched me transform from a woman who defined herself through her husband's success into someone who had built her own professional identity. The change hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked as the evening wound down. I considered the question seriously. "I regret the years I lost trying to be someone I wasn't. I regret that it took such a dramatic crisis to wake me up. But I don't regret the outcome." "Even losing the marriage?" "Especially losing the marriage. I was married to someone who saw me as an accessory, not a partner. The woman I am now would never settle for that kind of relationship." The next morning, I arrived at the Tribune to find a message waiting on my desk. It was from the editor-in-chief, requesting a meeting in his office. I gathered my notes from the Blackstone investigation and headed upstairs, wondering if there had been some development in the case. "Rebecca, sit down," said editor Tom Bradley, a gruff man in his 60s who had been running the Tribune for 15 years. "I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "The Blackstone story is getting national attention. We've had calls from 3 major publishers interested in book rights, and 2 production companies want to option the film rights." I blinked in surprise. "Film rights?" "The story has everything. Corporate espionage, betrayal, a woman who fights back and wins. It's the kind of David versus Goliath narrative that audiences love." I never thought about it that way. Tom leaned forward. "More importantly, I want you to consider leading a new investigative unit focused on corporate crime. The Blackstone case proved there's a huge story here, systematic fraud that's affecting families across the country. You could be the reporter who exposes it all." The offer was everything I had dreamed of during my years as a corporate wife, watching from the sidelines while other journalists built the careers I had abandoned. But it was also intimidating. Leading an investigative unit meant responsibility not just for my own work, but for guiding other reporters and setting the direction for major stories. "What would that involve?" I asked. "Your own team, your own budget, freedom to pursue stories wherever they lead. The kind of position that comes along maybe once in a career." I thought about the organizational chart Jake had shown me. All those companies infiltrated by corporate spies. All those families destroyed by sophisticated fraud schemes. There were dozens of stories waiting to be told. Hundreds of victims who deserved justice. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. Tom smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. When can you start?" "I already have." That afternoon, I stood in the conference room where my new investigative team was gathering for the first time. 5 experienced reporters, 2 research specialists, and a data analyst, all focused on exposing corporate crime and corruption. The whiteboard behind me was covered with potential story leads, companies showing suspicious patterns, executives with questionable backgrounds, financial irregularities that suggested systematic fraud. Our first major investigation will be comprehensive coverage of the Blackstone trial, I announced. But that's just the beginning. We're going to follow every thread, expose every connection, and make sure the public understands how vulnerable they are to this kind of sophisticated manipulation. As the meeting progressed, I felt the familiar rush of purposeful work, the satisfaction of using my skills for something that mattered. This was who I had always been meant to be. Not a corporate wife living in someone else's shadow, but a journalist fighting for truth and justice. After the meeting, I walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was probably sitting in his therapist's office, trying to understand how he had been so easily manipulated. Victoria was in federal custody, awaiting trial for crimes that could send her to prison for decades. And I was exactly where I belonged, using my intelligence and determination to protect other families from the kind of devastation we had all experienced. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jennifer, my lawyer, and now friend. Rebecca, I have news about the Victim Compensation Fund. The federal government had established a fund to compensate families whose businesses had been damaged by the Blackstone conspiracy. As the person who had broken the case open, I was entitled to a substantial reward. How much? I asked. $2.7 million. I sat down heavily in my chair. It was more money than I had ever imagined having, enough to secure my financial independence forever. There's one condition, Jennifer continued. The money comes with a non-disclosure agreement about your role in the investigation. What kind of non-disclosure? You couldn't write the book or participate in any film adaptations. The government wants to keep the focus on the criminals, not on individual victims who fought back. I laughed, surprising myself. Jennifer, that's the easiest decision I've ever made. You're turning down almost $3 million? I'm choosing my story over their money. Some things are worth more than financial security. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, working on the first chapter of what would become The Perfect Victim: How Corporate Spies Destroy American Families. The book would tell the complete story, not just the crimes that were committed, but the human cost of sophisticated manipulation and the courage it took to fight back. As I wrote, I thought about all the choices that had led me to this moment. The decision to give up journalism for marriage, the years of being the perfect corporate wife, the devastating discovery of Marcus's betrayal, the investigation that had revealed the truth about Victoria and her handlers, the choice to save a company rather than seek revenge, and finally the decision to reclaim my own life and purpose. Marcus had thought he was trading up when he chose Victoria over me. He had no way of knowing that he was actually setting me free to become the person I was always meant to be. The betrayal that was supposed to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for the most meaningful work of my life. The last line I wrote that night would become the final sentence of my book. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, because it forces you to discover who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself is stripped away. Outside my window, Chicago hummed with the energy of 8 million people pursuing their dreams, building their lives, making their choices. Tomorrow, I would be back in the newsroom, leading my team as we exposed another layer of corporate corruption. Next month, Victoria's trial would begin, and justice would finally be served. And somewhere in the city, Marcus would continue his therapy, learning to live with the consequences of choices that had cost him everything he thought he wanted while giving me everything I never knew I needed. The story was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was the one writing it. 3 weeks later, I stood in federal court watching Victoria Matthews enter her guilty plea. She wore a simple gray dress, her blonde hair pulled back severely, looking nothing like the confident woman who had once strutted through Hartwell Industries believing she controlled everyone around her. The judge accepted her plea agreement: 12 years in federal prison, full restitution to victims, and complete cooperation with ongoing investigations. As Victoria was led away in shackles, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that justice was being served, but also sadness for the waste of human potential. Victoria was clearly intelligent and capable. If she had used those talents legitimately, she could have built a successful career without destroying other people's lives. "Any comment for the press?" asked a reporter as I left the courthouse. "Corporate espionage destroys more than just businesses," I said. "It destroys trust, families, and communities. Today's verdict sends a message that these crimes have real consequences." The footage would run on the evening news, part of a media circus that had grown around the case. But for me, the real story was still being written in the pages of my book and the investigations my team was conducting. Back at the Tribune, I found my team buzzing with excitement over a new lead. Detective Rodriguez had joined us as a consultant, bringing his expertise in corporate security to help us understand the technical aspects of how these infiltration operations worked. "We've identified a pattern," announced Maria Santos, one of my senior investigators. "Companies that were targeted all had similar vulnerabilities: family ownership structures, informal security protocols, and executives who made key decisions without board oversight." "Like Marcus," I said. "Exactly. The spies weren't randomly choosing targets. They were systematically identifying companies where a single compromised executive could cause maximum damage." Rodriguez pulled up a digital map showing the geographic distribution of attacks. "Look at this. They started in smaller markets where there was less media scrutiny, refined their techniques, then moved to larger cities like Chicago. So Hartwell Industries wasn't the endgame, I realized. It was practice for something bigger. Much bigger. We have evidence that Blackstone was planning to target companies in New York and Los Angeles next. The potential financial impact could have been in the tens of billions. The scope of what we had prevented was staggering. By exposing Victoria's operation, we hadn't just saved one company, we had potentially saved dozens of others from similar attacks. "There's something else," Maria continued. "We've been investigating the training facility where these operatives were prepared. It's a private intelligence company called Strategic Solutions International, based in Virginia." She handed me a thick file containing financial records, employee rosters, and training materials that painted a disturbing picture. Strategic Solutions wasn't just training corporate spies. They were running a full-scale operation to infiltrate and manipulate American businesses. "They call it corporate influence campaigns," Rodriguez explained. "They market their services to foreign competitors, private equity firms, anyone who wants to acquire a company below market value." "How many operatives are we talking about?" "Over 200 active agents, all trained in psychological manipulation, financial analysis, and corporate infiltration techniques." I stared at the documents, realizing that Victoria had been just one soldier in a much larger army. We hadn't just uncovered a conspiracy. We had stumbled onto what amounted to economic warfare being conducted on American soil. This is our next investigation, I decided. We're going to expose the entire network. The next 6 months were a blur of research, interviews, and careful documentation. My team worked with federal agents, corporate security experts, and victims' families to piece together the full scope of Strategic Solutions operations. What we discovered was even more disturbing than we had imagined. The company had been operating for 7 years, targeting over 300 businesses across North America. They had perfected the art of corporate sabotage, using a combination of industrial espionage, executive manipulation, and financial warfare to transfer billions of dollars in assets to their clients. "The human cost is what really gets to me," said David Kim, our data analyst, as he showed me statistics from our investigation. 15,000 jobs lost, 43 family businesses destroyed, entire communities devastated when anchor employers disappeared. Each number represented real people, workers who lost their livelihoods, families who lost their savings, communities that lost their economic foundations. It was corporate warfare with civilian casualties. "We need to make this personal," I told the team. "Numbers are abstract. People need to see the faces behind the statistics." We spent weeks interviewing victims, documenting their stories, showing how sophisticated manipulation had destroyed lives that had taken generations to build. The Chen family in Portland, whose construction company had employed half their neighborhood, until a strategic solutions operative convinced the CEO to make disastrous financial decisions. The Martinez family in Phoenix, whose restaurant chain had been systematically undermined by an infiltrator who gained access through a romantic relationship with the founder's daughter. The pattern was always the same: identify a vulnerability, exploit personal relationships, manipulate decision-makers, then swoop in with a rescue offer that was actually theft disguised as salvation. As our investigation deepened, I found myself thinking often about Marcus and how easily he had been manipulated. He wasn't unique or unusually weak. He was simply human, with the same psychological vulnerabilities that Strategic Solutions had spent years learning to exploit. One evening, as I worked late at the office putting together our exposé, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus appeared in the doorway of my office, looking nervous and uncertain. "Rebecca, I hope you don't mind. Security let me up because I'm still technically a shareholder." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What brings you here, Marcus?" He sat down carefully, like a man who was still learning to navigate a world where he couldn't assume his welcome. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For saving the company. For not destroying me when you could have. For..." He paused, struggling with words. "For being a better person than I deserved." I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with something I had never seen there before: humility. "How are you doing, Marcus?" "Therapy is helping. I'm starting to understand how my need for validation made me vulnerable to manipulation. Dr. Peterson says it probably stems from never feeling good enough for my father. It was more self-awareness than Marcus had shown in our entire marriage." "That's good, Marcus. Understanding yourself is the first step toward making better choices. I know I have no right to ask this, but I was wondering if you might consider having dinner with me sometime? Not as a romantic gesture," he added quickly. "Just as, I don't know, two people who shared 8 years and want to end on a better note." I looked at this man who had once been my husband, who had betrayed me and nearly destroyed everything his father had built, but who was clearly working to become someone better. "I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus. Too much has happened." He nodded sadly but without surprise. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful for who you are and sorry for not seeing it when it mattered." After he left, I sat in the empty office thinking about forgiveness and second chances. Marcus was genuinely trying to change, but that didn't erase the damage he had caused or obligate me to be part of his redemption journey. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, only ended with dignity. The next morning brought news that changed everything. FBI agents had raided Strategic Solutions International's headquarters, arresting 12 executives and seizing thousands of documents. Our investigation had provided the evidence needed for federal warrants. "It's the largest corporate espionage bust in U.S. history," announced FBI Director Sarah Chen during a press conference. This organization posed a direct threat to American economic security. The raids made headlines across the country, but the real story was still developing. Over the following weeks, more arrests followed as investigators traced the network of clients who had hired Strategic Solutions to destroy their competitors. Foreign corporations, hedge funds, private equity firms, dozens of organizations had paid millions of dollars for corporate sabotage services. Some of the biggest names in international business were suddenly facing federal investigations. "We did this," Jake said, reviewing the latest arrest reports. "Our investigation brought down an entire network of economic terrorism." The term seemed overly dramatic until I considered the scope of what strategic solutions had accomplished. They had systematically undermined American businesses, transferred wealth to foreign interests, and destabilized entire communities. If that wasn't economic terrorism, what was? My book was published 8 months later to national acclaim. The Perfect Victim became a bestseller, not just because of the corporate intrigue, but because readers connected with the story of personal transformation and resilience. I appeared on morning shows, gave keynote speeches at business conferences, and testified before congressional committees about the need for better corporate security regulations. The shy corporate wife who had once defined herself through her husband's success was now a recognized expert on economic crime. But the most meaningful moment came during a book signing in Denver, when a middle-aged woman approached my table, with tears in her eyes. "My husband was targeted by one of these operations 3 years ago," she said. "We lost our family restaurant, our savings, everything. Reading your story helped me understand that it wasn't his fault. He was a victim of professionals who knew exactly how to manipulate him." That conversation reminded me why the work mattered. Beyond the headlines and the federal prosecutions, real families needed to understand that they weren't alone, and they weren't to blame for falling victim to sophisticated predators. The strategic solutions trials continued for 2 years, resulting in over 50 convictions and hundreds of millions in restitution payments. The case became a turning point in how federal authorities approached corporate crime, leading to new laws and enforcement mechanisms. Meanwhile, Hartwell Industries continued to thrive under Janet Stevens' leadership. The company had become a model for corporate security, consulting with other businesses on how to protect themselves from infiltration. What had almost destroyed the company had ultimately made it stronger and more valuable. As for Victoria, she served her sentence quietly, reportedly spending her time in prison earning a master's degree in psychology. Whether she planned to use that knowledge for legitimate purposes upon her release remained to be seen. The final chapter of my book ended with a reflection on the nature of betrayal and recovery. The worst thing that had ever happened to me, discovering my husband's affair with a corporate spy, had led to the best thing that had ever happened to me, discovering my own strength, purpose, and capacity for making a difference in the world. Standing. In my new office at the Tribune, surrounded by awards for investigative journalism and photos from speaking engagements, I realized that I had become exactly who I was meant to be. Not the perfect corporate wife living in someone else's shadow, but a journalist using her voice to protect others from the kind of sophisticated predators who had once targeted my family. The betrayal that was supposed to destroy me had instead become the foundation for the most meaningful work of my life. And in a world full of corporate predators and economic warfare, that work was far from finished. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.